The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a soft, golden hue across the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped, a distant dog barked, and the rhythmic sound of a lawnmower hummed in the background. It was just another typical morning for Sara. But for Sara, the morning was anything but typical. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in a maze of fear, confusion, and sorrow. The events of the past few months played out like a movie she couldn't stop watching, a script she hadn't written, but was forced to live. Just a few short months ago, Sara's life had been perfect, or so it seemed. A successful career in marketing, a beautiful home with her husband Mark and their 2 children, Ellie and James, who brought laughter and joy to their lives. Life was predictable, comfortable, and, for the most part, happy. But then, as it often happens, life threw a curveball that Sara wasn't prepared for. It started with a phone call that changed everything. Mark, her rock, her constant, had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The doctor's words echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat. Stage 4. We need to begin treatment immediately. Sara remembered that moment in vivid detail, the sharp intake of breath as the weight of the diagnosis sank in, the tears she had fought to hold back, the sudden heaviness in the air around them. For weeks, Sara had watched Mark battle the disease with a courage she had never seen before. He was a fighter, but so was she. It wasn't just the emotional toll that threatened to break her. It was the physical exhaustion, the constant hospital visits, the days spent sitting in sterile waiting rooms, the nights she spent alone, worrying if tomorrow would be too much. And yet, through it all, she had maintained the facade of strength. She had to. Her family depended on her. But now, as Sara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. Mark's condition had worsened. The treatments were no longer working. They had been told to prepare for the worst. Sara's heart broke with every passing day, and the weight of uncertainty bore down on her like an unrelenting storm. Her body was tired. Her mind was weary. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up this charade of optimism. But then something unexpected happened. As Sara lay there, her thoughts drifting between hope and despair, a memory from her childhood surfaced, a memory of her grandmother. Grandma Rose had always been a symbol of resilience in Sara's life. She had survived the Great Depression, raised 3 children on her own after the loss of her husband, and faced every challenge with a quiet strength that left a lasting impression on everyone around her. Grandma Rose had once told Sara, "In the darkest moments, when you think all is lost, that's when you must find your light. It's inside of you, Sara. Never forget that." The memory was a whisper, a reminder of a lesson long forgotten. Suddenly, it was as if a switch had been flipped in Sara's mind. She wasn't sure how it would happen or when, but the words of her grandmother began to echo louder in her heart. You must find your light. In that moment, Sara made a choice. She would no longer allow herself to be consumed by fear. She would rise, not for herself, but for Mark, for Ellie, for James, because they needed her. They needed her hope. She didn't know how things would unfold, but she knew this. Hope wasn't something you found. It was something you created. It was a choice. The next few days were filled with moments of quiet reflection, deep breaths, and small acts of courage. Sara decided that she would focus on what she could control. She would embrace the love and support of her family and friends, and she would make every moment with Mark count. She had always been the one to keep things together, but this time, it wasn't about holding it all in. It was about embracing the vulnerability that came with loving someone through their hardest battle. It was about finding strength in softness, finding courage in the unknown, and leaning into the support of those around her. One evening, after a particularly long day of hospital visits, Sara sat beside Mark's bed, holding his hand. His breathing was shallow, but he smiled up at her with those same warm eyes that had always been her safe place. "I don't know what's going to happen, Mark," Sara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm here. I'm with you. I won't give up on you." Mark squeezed her hand weakly. "I know, Sara. I know. And I'm not giving up either. We've been through so much together. We'll get through this too. Sara smiled through her tears, feeling the faintest spark of hope igniting within her heart. In that moment, surrounded by uncertainty, she realized that the power of hope was not just about wishing for things to get better. It was about believing, even in the face of adversity, that better days could come, that there was always a way to rise above. As she looked out the window, watching the sky slowly shift from golden to pink, Sara made a vow to herself. She would be the light in this darkness. She would find the strength to carry on, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed her. The journey ahead would be hard. It would be full of tears, pain, and moments of doubt. But Sara knew one thing for sure. With hope, anything was possible. And with that, she closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, asking for the strength to carry on, one step at a time. The world around Sara seemed to blur as she sat quietly by Mark's bedside, watching him sleep. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Despite the calm atmosphere in the hospital room, a storm raged inside her heart. She had always been the one to hold things together, the one who kept the family strong. But now, as Mark's condition continued to decline, Sara found herself questioning her own strength. The next morning, after Mark had gone through yet another round of painful treatment, Sara decided to take a walk outside. She needed to clear her head. The soft autumn breeze carried the scent of freshly fallen leaves, and for the first time in days, she felt a momentary sense of peace. But as she strolled through the hospital courtyard, Sara's thoughts turned inward. How much longer could she keep up this facade of strength? The physical and emotional toll of Mark's illness was wearing on her. Her body was fatigued, her muscles aching from nights spent sitting upright in hospital chairs, and her mind, constantly racing, had no time to rest. She felt exhausted to her core, a deep weariness that went beyond physical tiredness. This was something deeper. As Sara walked along the winding path, she passed a young woman running on a treadmill in the hospital gym. She looked around the same age as Sara, and the woman's focused expression intrigued her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she had taken care of herself in any way other than surviving each day. She was too absorbed in Mark's battle to notice the toll it was taking on her own body. Had she forgotten about herself in the process? The question lingered, but it wasn't until a week later, after Mark's condition deteriorated even further, that Sara realized the importance of her own health, not just for her own sake, but for Mark's. She had always prided herself on being the pillar of strength for her family, but it dawned on her that if she didn't take care of herself, she wouldn't be able to help anyone. It started small. A brief walk in the morning. A few stretches to ease the tension in her shoulders. She began taking a little time each day to listen to her body. It wasn't easy, but little by little, Sara began to feel a shift. At first, the physical exhaustion didn't go away. It was still there, lingering, a constant companion. But as she slowly started to take control of her own well-being, she began to feel a different kind of strength rising inside her. Mark's condition continued to worsen, and Sara's new routine of self-care, although small, became her anchor. Each day, she would push herself to do something physical. Some days it was a light jog through the hospital parking lot. Other days, it was simply a few deep breaths in the morning, feeling the stretch in her limbs as she raised her arms toward the sky. Each moment of self-care felt like an act of defiance against the overwhelming force of the cancer that was slowly taking her husband away. It wasn't just physical strength she was building. It was mental endurance as well. Every morning, she would wake up feeling like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But over time, as she focused on her own well-being, Sara started to find moments of inner peace. She learned to embrace the discomfort. The tension in her muscles, the burning sensation in her legs after a run. These sensations were reminders that she was alive, that she was pushing herself forward, despite the storm of emotions she felt on a daily basis. One evening, after a particularly tough day, Sara found herself sitting in her car, staring out at the city lights. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained, but something had shifted inside her. She was stronger than she realized. The following morning, Sara decided to push herself even further. As the sun rose, she set out for a run, her first real jog in years. The crisp morning air hit her lungs, and as she moved, she could feel the rhythm of her body, each step a reminder of how far she had come. She wasn't running from her problems. She was running towards something greater, the strength to endure. Days turned into weeks, and Sara began to see the small victories she had once overlooked. The mornings she woke up without feeling completely drained. The days she managed to keep a smile on her face when Mark's pain became unbearable. The moments of clarity where, despite the chaos, she found herself thinking of something other than the next hospital visit. But perhaps the most significant victory came when Sara realized that her strength wasn't just about enduring her own suffering. It was about facing the pain of watching someone you love struggle and still finding a way to move forward. One evening, after Mark had undergone another grueling round of chemotherapy, Sara helped him into bed, his body trembling from the exhaustion. She sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, a reassuring presence in the midst of the storm. "You're doing great," she whispered, even though she didn't feel strong herself. "We're doing this together." Mark looked at her with tired eyes, a faint smile curling on his lips. "You've been so strong, Sara. Stronger than I ever imagined. I don't know how you're doing it." Sara squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with love and sorrow at once. "It's not about doing it perfectly, Mark. It's about doing it even when it hurts. It's about enduring, even when everything seems impossible." Mark closed his eyes, his grip on her hand loosening as he drifted into a fitful sleep. As Sara sat there, watching over him, she realized that she had tapped into a source of strength she had never known she had. It wasn't about being invincible. It wasn't about never breaking down. It was about enduring, about standing tall in the face of adversity, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And in that moment, with Mark's hand in hers, Sara knew that no matter what the future held, she would endure. It was a Sunday morning when the news came, like a cruel storm tearing through the fabric of Sara's reality. Mark had passed away. After months of battling cancer, he had slipped quietly into the night, his struggle over. Sara sat in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that felt as though it had been shattered beyond repair. The house, once full of laughter and love, now seemed hollow. The silence was deafening. The last few months had been a blur. The hospital visits, the late nights spent talking with Mark about their hopes for the future, their dreams for their children, it all felt so distant now. In the wake of Mark's death, Sara was left alone with her thoughts and the overwhelming weight of grief. She had been strong for so long, but now it felt as though the very foundation of her existence had crumbled beneath her feet. As the weeks passed, Sara found herself moving through the motions of daily life, getting the kids ready for school, cooking meals, attending to the house. But inside, she was drowning in sorrow. She felt like a shadow of the woman she had once been, the vibrant, optimistic person who had always looked at life with a sense of purpose. The pain of loss seemed to seep into every corner of her being. It was in the empty chair beside her at the dinner table. It was in the quiet moments when she would reach for Mark's hand, only to remember that it wasn't there anymore. She had tried to keep everything together, to be the strong mother, the strong friend, the strong woman. But now, she realized, her strength felt like a mask, one that was beginning to crack. One particularly hard day, Sara found herself standing in front of Mark's desk. It was cluttered with papers, his work, his plans, his life. She hadn't touched it since the day he had died. Everything in the room seemed to speak of him, of the man he had been, the love of her life, the father of their children. She stood there, unable to move, as memories of their life together flooded her mind. She remembered their first date, their wedding day, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about their future. They had planned everything, trips, dreams, a life filled with more moments, more laughter, more love. But now those plans had been ripped away, and Sara was left with nothing but the rubble of a life once shared. As she sat down on the edge of the desk, Tears fell freely. It wasn't just the pain of losing him. It was the realization that she had to rebuild from scratch. The dreams they had shared were no longer hers alone to hold. She felt like a stranger in her own life. A few days later, Sara stood in the center of the living room, looking at the walls she had spent years decorating. The photos of family vacations, birthday parties, and holidays that once brought her joy now only reminded her of the emptiness she felt. She knew she couldn't keep living in the past, but the thought of moving forward felt impossible. It was then that Ellie, her daughter, came running into the room, her little face full of excitement. "Mom, look. I made this for you," Ellie said, holding out a drawing. It was a picture of Sara and Mark, holding hands, with Ellie and James standing beside them. Sara took the drawing in her hands, her heart aching. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Thank you." Ellie looked up at her mother with big, bright eyes. "Don't be sad, Mom. We have so much to look forward to. Dad wouldn't want us to be sad all the time. He'd want us to be happy." Ellie's simple words struck a chord deep within Sara. In that moment, she realized that while Mark was no longer there, his love, his lessons, and his memory still had a place in their lives. She didn't need to hold on to the past in order to honor him. She needed to create a future for herself, for her children, a future that would still carry his spirit, but also allow for new beginnings. For the first time in weeks, Sara felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a grand revelation or a sudden burst of energy. It was more like a small seed planted in her heart, a seed that would need care and time to grow. The following weeks were filled with small, yet significant steps. Sara began by going through Mark's belongings, deciding which items to keep and which to give away. It was painful, but it was also cathartic. She kept his favorite books, his old guitar, and a few personal mementos, things that would keep his memory alive. But the rest, she realized, had to go. There were still days when Sara felt the weight of grief pressing down on her, when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. But she started to allow herself to feel those moments, to honor them, rather than running from them. She spent time with friends, sharing stories about Mark, remembering the good times, laughing through the tears. At work, Sara slowly began to reclaim parts of herself. Her career had always been a source of pride, but she had neglected it during Mark's illness. Now, she started taking on new projects, reconnecting with colleagues, and pushing herself to find joy in the things that had once excited her. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she felt like giving up, but each small victory, each new project completed, each smile from her children, was another step toward healing. Sara also began taking better care of herself. She hadn't realized how much she had neglected her own well-being while caring for Mark. But now, she was starting to prioritize herself, if only in small ways. She took long walks in the park, cooked meals that nourished her body, and, slowly, she began to sleep again without waking up in the middle of the night in a panic. In her quiet moments, she would remind herself that it was okay to feel joy again. It didn't mean she had forgotten Mark. It simply meant that she was learning how to live with the love he had given her and how to honor his memory by finding happiness in the future. One evening, as Sara was tucking Ellie and James into bed, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Her children were thriving, growing, and healing, just as she was. The laughter in their voices, the warmth in their hugs, reminded her that life still held moments of beauty, even after the most painful of losses. Sara took a deep breath, looking out the window at the stars. Mark was gone, but he had left behind a legacy of love, of lessons learned, and of strength. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know exactly where her life was headed, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to move forward. She was rebuilding, not just her life, but herself. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be days of doubt, but Sara knew one thing for sure. She was no longer defined by the tragedy of her loss. She was defined by her ability to rise again, to start over, to rebuild from the ruins and create something new. And as she whispered goodnight to her children, Sara felt the first true sense of peace since Mark's passing. She was ready. The journey was just beginning. Sara had always been someone who believed in purpose. From the moment she and Mark had met, their shared vision of a life filled with meaning had driven their decisions. They wanted to make a difference, leave a mark on the world, even if it was just in their small corner of it. But after Mark's death, Sara had struggled to find her sense of purpose again. The first few months after his passing were consumed with survival, taking care of her children, maintaining her job, and simply getting through each day. But as time passed, a question began to nag at her. What was the point of it all? She had always been so driven by the idea of making a difference, yet now, in the wake of loss, it felt as if the world had lost its color. There were moments when Sara simply didn't know what direction to go in. One chilly autumn morning, as Sara was cleaning out some old drawers in her office, she stumbled across something she hadn't seen in years: Mark's journal. It had been tucked away for months, forgotten in the frenzy of the last few months of his life. As she opened it, the familiar smell of his cologne mixed with the scent of old paper, and Sara's heart ached with longing. The pages were filled with Mark's musings on life, his hopes, and, as always, his belief in the power of love and helping others. One particular entry caught her eye. Sara and I always talked about how we could change the world, one small act at a time. Maybe it's not about making grand gestures. Maybe it's about finding purpose in the smallest moments. When everything seems lost, we can still find a way to help, to heal, to grow. We don't need to change the world for it to matter. We just need to matter to the people around us. Reading those words, something inside Sara clicked. Mark had always believed in the little things, the quiet acts of kindness, the ways people showed up for each other. And in that moment, Sara realized that her life didn't have to be defined by monumental changes or big achievements. It could be defined by the impact she had on the lives of those around her. She didn't have to search the world for her purpose. It was right in front of her. It was her children, her friends, her community. It didn't take long for Sara to start taking action on this newfound sense of purpose. She reached out to a few of her closest friends, women she had met during her years of volunteering and community service, and pitched an idea that had been swirling in her mind for weeks. What if she could create something that would honor Mark's legacy, something that would allow her to channel the pain of loss into something meaningful? What if she could start a foundation that helped families who were going through similar struggles? Families who were battling cancer or other life-threatening illnesses, and who needed not just financial support, but emotional support as well. The idea of helping others who were navigating the same storm she had felt so deeply was something that ignited a spark in Sara. It was a way to take the darkness she had been living through and transform it into light for others. She didn't know exactly how it would all come together, but she knew that she had to try. And so, the Mark Foundation was born. The early days of the foundation were filled with the kind of challenges that Sara had come to expect. There were countless phone calls to be made, endless forms to fill out, and the persistent feeling of imposter syndrome that haunted her every step. Who was she to think she could run a foundation? She was just a woman who had lost her husband. She didn't have the answers. She didn't have all the resources. But then, Sara remembered something her grandmother had said to her once. The best way to heal is to help someone else heal. With that thought in mind, Sara pushed through the self-doubt. She began organizing small events, fundraisers, community gatherings, and outreach programs for families who were dealing with illness. Slowly but surely, the foundation began to grow. People rallied behind her, believing in the cause. Local businesses donated their time and resources. Volunteers showed up to help, and before Sara knew it, the foundation was making a tangible difference in the lives of those who needed it most. But more than the impact it had on others, the foundation began to heal Sara. She was no longer just a woman mourning her loss. She was a woman who was actively creating change, finding purpose through the pain. Every time she spoke with a family who had benefited from the foundation, every time she saw a mother's face light up with gratitude, Sara felt a piece of her own heart begin to heal. In the midst of all the work, something else began to emerge for Sara, her own passions that had been buried under the weight of grief. She had always loved writing, and as she spent more time working with others and sharing her story, she found herself journaling once again. This time, however, Her writing was not about mourning Mark, it was about celebrating him. It was about finding strength in the hardest moments and using those lessons to fuel a greater purpose. One evening, as Sara sat at her desk, her fingers flying over the keys, she found herself writing a letter to Mark. I don't know if I will ever fully understand why you had to leave so soon, but I do know one thing. You have given me the strength to carry on. You've shown me that purpose can be found even in the most painful of circumstances. I'm building something that will help others, something that will make your memory live on in a way that honors the love you gave me. Tears filled her eyes as she finished the letter, and for the first time in a long while, Sara felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her purpose. As the Mark Foundation grew, so did Sara. She was no longer the woman consumed by grief, trapped in the past. She was a woman who had learned to channel her pain into something powerful, something that would outlast the darkness she had endured. Sara wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She had taken the raw pain of losing Mark and turned it into a force for good. And as she watched the families who had been helped by the foundation, watched the smiles of children whose lives had been touched by the love and support she was able to provide, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey ahead would never be easy. There would still be moments of sadness, still be days when the weight of loss threatened to consume her. But Sara knew that she was no longer defined by her grief. She was defined by her ability to rise, to find purpose even in the darkest of times, and to turn her pain into passion. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift Mark could have ever given her, the strength to live with purpose. The days following Mark's death had been a blur of emotions and decisions. Sara had buried herself in the work of rebuilding her life, creating the Mark Foundation, focusing on her children, and carving out a new sense of purpose. But despite the progress she had made, there were moments when she would come to a halt, overwhelmed by the weight of everything. It was during one of these moments, one cold winter afternoon, that she realized something that had always been true but had become clearer with time. Sara was never truly alone. Yes, she had lost Mark, the person she had shared her life with, the father of her children. But the support system that surrounded her, the people who loved her, the community she had built with Mark and continued to nurture on her own, was her lifeline. She had always known that family was important. She had always believed in the value of community. But now, with everything changed, those beliefs were being tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was late afternoon, and the house was filled with the sound of the kids playing. Ellie and James were running around in the living room, their laughter echoing through the halls. For the first time in what felt like forever, the sound didn't feel like an intrusion into her grief. Instead, it felt like a reminder that life still had joy in it, even in the midst of loss. Sara looked out the window, her mind momentarily drifting. She was grateful for the memories Mark had left her, and grateful for the memories they had created as a family. But she also understood now, in a way she hadn't before, how important it was to lean into her family. She wasn't expected to carry the burden alone. Mark had always been a huge believer in family. He'd often say, "We don't need to be perfect, but we need to be there for each other. Always." And now, as Sara watched her children laugh, play, and grow, she saw the importance of that statement more clearly than ever. She wasn't just their mother. She was a part of a larger web of relationships, her parents, her sisters, her friends, who were there to help her bear the weight of the world. They had supported her during Mark's illness, and now they were helping her rebuild, reminding her that, even though things were hard, she wasn't alone. One Saturday morning, Sara received a phone call from her best friend, Lauren. "Hey, I was thinking you should come over for lunch today. Just a quiet afternoon. No pressure. Just us like old times." Sara hesitated for a moment. She'd been so wrapped up in the foundation and taking care of the kids that she'd neglected her friendships. She hadn't realized how much she missed her connection with Lauren until now. "I don't know. I should really catch up on some things at home," Sara replied, though she knew deep down she needed the break. But Lauren wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've been doing so much, Sara. Let us take care of you for a change. You need to rest, even if just for a couple of hours. Come on." It'll be good for you. Sara finally agreed, realizing that she did need to rest. Sometimes, leaning on others didn't mean weakness. It meant allowing yourself to receive love, care, and support when you needed it most. When Sara arrived at Lauren's house, she was met with the comforting smell of homemade food and the warmth of a familiar embrace. Lauren's children were playing in the background, and the casual atmosphere made Sara feel at ease. As they sat down for lunch, Lauren quietly asked, "How are you doing, really?" Sara smiled, though it felt bittersweet. "I'm trying, Lauren. Some days feel okay, but others feel like too much." Lauren nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I can't pretend to know exactly what you're going through, but I do know that you don't have to carry it all on your own. You have people who care about you. We're all here for you." The simple reassurance was like a balm on a wound Sara hadn't realized was still so raw. As the weeks turned into months, Sara's realization about the importance of family and community deepened. It wasn't just about leaning on her parents or close friends. It was also about the wider community she had built through the Mark Foundation. The people who came together to help others in times of crisis, those who had been recipients of the Foundation's assistance, and those who had volunteered their time, had become an unexpected source of support for Sara. There was Thomas, a volunteer who had lost his own wife to cancer a few years ago, and who now helped with fundraising events. He often called to check in on Sara, offering a listening ear or a quiet word of encouragement. Then there was Rachel, another volunteer, who had become a close friend through the foundation. She'd often send Sara little notes of encouragement or drop by with homemade treats, just to brighten her day. It was through these people that Sara realized something essential. Support didn't always come in the form of grand gestures. Sometimes it was in the little things. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at the foundation, Sara was exhausted. The children had gone to bed, and she sat at her kitchen table, her mind racing. It was a Saturday night, and she was about to dive into a stack of emails when the doorbell rang. It was Rachel, holding a large thermos and a plate of cookies. "I know you've been working late. Thought you could use a little break," she said with a smile. Sara smiled back, feeling a wave of warmth flood through her. She hadn't realized how much she needed that small, thoughtful gesture. As the months went on, Sara began to understand the full impact of what it meant to be a part of a community. She no longer saw herself as an isolated individual trying to handle everything on her own. She saw herself as a piece of a larger puzzle, held together by the love and support of those around her. There were still moments of overwhelming grief, days when the pain of Mark's absence felt unbearable. But it was in those moments that Sara turned to her community. Her family, her friends, the people who had supported her from the beginning, they were the ones who reminded her that she didn't have to face it alone. She had spent so long trying to be everything for everyone, believing that strength came from being self-sufficient, but now she knew the truth. True strength lies in connection. It wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about allowing yourself to be supported, and in turn, offering support to others. It was about sharing the load and walking together through the tough times. One evening, as Sara sat down to dinner with Ellie and James, she looked around the table at her children, her heart swelling with love. Life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She had lost Mark, but she had gained something valuable in return, a deeper understanding of the power of family and community. "We're going to be okay," Sara said softly, looking at her children. Ellie, ever the optimist, smiled up at her. "I know we are, Mom. We have so many people who love us." Sara nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She realized, for the first time, that she didn't need to be afraid of the future. She had a network of love and support that would carry her through. And in that moment, surrounded by family and community, Sara finally felt the strength to face whatever came next. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as Sara stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared dinner. It had been one of those days, the kind where the weight of the world seemed too heavy, the challenges seemed insurmountable, and the fear of what the future might hold crept into every corner of her mind. Mark's death had left an irreplaceable hole in her heart, but that wasn't the only source of fear that had taken root in Sara's life. The foundation, while meaningful and fulfilling, often felt like an overwhelming responsibility. The thought of managing the foundation's growth, of reaching out to more people, and of handling the complex logistics and emotional toll, at times it felt like too much. For weeks now, she had been struggling with a deep fear. What if I can't do this? What if I fail? The fear gnawed at her, quiet at first, but now it had grown into a persistent, loud voice that made her question everything. What if the foundation doesn't make the difference I hope it will? What if I can't handle the pressure? What if I disappoint everyone who is depending on me? And there it was again, the fear that had followed her since Mark's diagnosis, since his death. Fear of the unknown. Fear of failure. Fear of the future. But tonight, something was different. Sara was tired of running from the fear. She was tired of allowing it to control her. She had to face it, or it would hold her back forever. It wasn't just the foundation that scared Sara. It was everything: being a single mother, being a leader, being a woman in a world that often seemed too chaotic to navigate. She had spent so much time trying to keep things together, to hold her family up, to support everyone around her, that she had neglected the one thing that mattered most: herself. And now, as the uncertainty of life stretched out before her, Sara realized that she had to find courage. Courage to move forward, courage to step into the unknown. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, and the path ahead would be filled with difficult decisions and moments of doubt. But if there was one thing she had learned through her journey, it was this: courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to take action despite it. That evening after dinner, Sara went for a walk. She needed space to think, to process the emotions swirling inside her. As she walked through the quiet neighborhood, her mind wandered back to the first day she had learned about Mark's illness. How terrified she had been. How, at first, she hadn't known how to face it. How she had kept pushing through the fear, day after day, because that's what was needed. But now, with Mark gone, she realized she had been living in survival mode for so long. She had been afraid to slow down, afraid to acknowledge her own fear because she didn't want to appear weak. But she had come to understand that there was no shame in feeling afraid. The real strength came in accepting that fear, confronting it, and moving forward anyway. As she stood on a quiet street corner, gazing up at the stars, Sara made a choice. She would no longer let fear dictate her life. She would face the uncertainty head-on. She would take it one step at a time. The next morning, Sara woke up early. She had a meeting scheduled with a potential donor for the Mark Foundation, and the thought of it made her stomach twist with nerves. It wasn't just about the donation, it was about the responsibility that came with it. Every decision she made could have a profound impact, and sometimes the weight of that responsibility felt like too much to bear. But then she remembered something Mark had always said: do one thing every day that scares you. It was a mantra he had lived by, one that had guided him through his own challenges. And as Sara stood in front of her mirror, preparing for the meeting, she whispered those words to herself. She wasn't just showing up for the donor. She was showing up for herself. She was taking one step toward facing her fear, one small act of courage at a time. The meeting itself was nerve-wracking, but Sara did what she had learned to do over the past year. She spoke from the heart. She talked about the Foundation's mission, about the families they had helped, and about how much it meant to her to honor Mark's memory by continuing the work they had started together. To her surprise, the donor was moved. By the end of the meeting, they had pledged a substantial contribution to the foundation. It wasn't just the donation that filled Sara with a sense of accomplishment. It was the fact that she had faced her fear, walked into that room, and asked for what they needed. For the first time in a long while, Sara felt a surge of pride. She had done it. Not because she had it all figured out, but because she had shown up despite the fear. She had done the thing that terrified her, and it had led to something positive. As Sara's journey continued, she began to notice something. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being vulnerable. It was about being willing to face the things that terrified her and allowing herself to feel that fear without letting it control her. She had always been a person who kept things close to the chest, who avoided vulnerability because it felt safer. But as she continued her work with the foundation and in her personal life, she began to see the power in opening up to others. She wasn't the only one who felt afraid. Everyone did. Her friends, her family, the people she helped through the foundation. Fear was universal. And when Sara allowed herself to be vulnerable, when she shared her struggles with others, she found that she wasn't met with judgment. Instead, she was met with understanding, with compassion, and with the recognition that everyone is in this together. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Sara sat down with her sister, Lucy, on the porch. The sky was dark, and the stars were faintly visible through the haze of city lights. "I'm scared, Lou," Sara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that I'm not doing enough. I'm scared that I'm failing the foundation, failing my kids, failing myself." Lucy reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're doing more than enough, Sara. You've already accomplished so much. And you're not failing. You're living through the hardest thing anyone can live through, and you're still standing. That's strength." Sara smiled weakly, her eyes filling with tears. "It doesn't feel like strength most of the time." "But it is," Lucy said softly. "It's courage. The courage to face each day, to keep moving forward even when you don't know what comes next. That's what makes you strong." As Sara moved through the days that followed, she started to embrace this new understanding of courage. She understood now that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to keep going, to keep taking steps, even when the path was unclear and the future uncertain. There were still moments of doubt, still days when the fear would resurface, but Sara knew that she had the power to face it. She had faced loss, faced grief, faced the overwhelming responsibilities of the foundation, and she was still standing. In those quiet moments when fear crept in, Sara would remind herself, courage is not about being fearless. It's about moving forward despite the fear. And with that knowledge, she took another step forward, ready for whatever came next.